I am here in central Massachusetts, and one of the cool things we have here is called the Central Mass Rail Trail. What it is they took a lot of the railroads that are no longer in use back from the 1840s through the 1880s, 1890s, and they made a walking path out of it. This walking path is miles and miles and miles long, and right here, as you can see, there's a railroad, and this is part of that Central Mass Rail Trail, but this part hasn't been redone. So, in lots of these, they'll take out the tracks, they'll regrade it, put down some gravel so that you can ride bikes and have a little bit easier of a hike along it. And they're really popular destinations for hiking. But I like this one because you still get to see the old railroad. Imagine what it was like having trains come along here when the trains might have been the lifeblood of the town or the area back before automobiles. So it's kind of cool to walk those paths. And this one that we're on goes right along one of the main roads. But because it hasn't been rejuvenated, they don't mark it. So it's a quiet little area to take a hike. One of the things you'll notice behind me is we still have some ice. Being towards the middle endish of March here in New England, it's still getting over the winter. Luckily, it was a pretty mild winter this year, so not so much snow to deal with, but we're just getting ready for all the flowers to start popping up and blooming, all the trees to get back to life. And if I took you on a walk through this trail in, let's say, 3 weeks to a month, these leaves will be green on the trees and it'd be all filled in and be a totally different scene. So I'm glad I got out here and saw kind of the sparseness that the winter brings us here, but still a beautiful day, having a great time. Right off the rails here, we have this cool looking swamp, and one of the cool things about that is all these plants are starting to pop up. You can see them popping up all around. One of the first signs that spring is really here. I love to see it. I love to see all the plants being reborn, regrowing like this. It's a great time of year in New England. So one of the important things when I'm taking a hike is I want to make sure that I'm safe doing it. And hiking on railroad tracks can always be a little iffy. You want to make sure that no train's going to come, and if you do think they're abandoned, you want to make sure of it. As you can see behind me, there are about 18-inch thick trees laying across it, and I'm pretty sure no train's making it through that. So if the train tracks look like this and have big trees laying down, I feel pretty safe. If you look here, you can see how disintegrated these old railroad rails were. And this comes from hundreds of years of sitting out like this. But you look at more modern day railroads and you can tell how much Mother Nature has already tried to reclaim these. Shows you how old they are too, so really cool area. Those extra rails were probably pulled up from here when they abandoned the railroad. Another reason I feel pretty safe walking on it is trains can't really jump these roads, so. But right now, we're getting into the town of Berlin. And we're a little east of there right now. We're about 30 miles west of Boston, and this train track would have been the lifeline for people in the area. Think about riding 30 miles on a horse to try to get into Boston versus hopping on a train. This probably opened up a whole new world for these people. It's still a rural farming town, but back when it was a day and a half journey to get to Boston, it was probably a whole lot more rural. So opening up a railway like this would have blown people's minds who have never been into a city. And I kind of like thinking about that, you know? Where we are right now, these people would have just been getting back to their hometown, filled with stories from the big city to tell their friends who have never been there, talking about how big some of the buildings were and how busy the life was there. We're talking 1800s Boston, so still night and day from what we are now, but it would have been mind-blowing to those people. Alright, we were walking along and I saw these cool quartz boulders sticking out. They have some really cool coloration in them. This one's even got some black sticking out of it. So that's a pretty cool one. And this one's got a cool band running through of quartz and then some bedrock above and below it. Actually, we can pick that guy up and you can check it out. So that is a really cool quartz boulder. So I heard a cool story about railroad tracks and why the width of the tracks is the way that they are. And here in America, we got our design for the railroad from England. And even though there's no train tracks from England to the United States, when they were going through their industrial revolution, we stole their information. So, using their blueprints, we get the same width track. Now you might be wondering, how did they come up with the widths of the tracks? Well, that goes back to old wagons. When they invented the railroad there, they decided for the axles to the trains, they would go to who makes the axles now for the wagons. And these wagon makers used the same measurements that they had for wagons for the trains. And that is how we got the width. But then I was wondering how they got the width for the wagons. And the story said that they got the width of the tires for the wagons from the Romans when the Romans brought their chariots to England way back in the day. 1300s, 1100s, something like that. So, these Roman armies came through and they rode their chariots by the thousands on English roads. And they created grooves in them that were so deep they couldn't get them out. So, if they made a different width, it would end up snapping the axles. To counteract this, the English wagon makers just made them the same size width, which led to train tracks being that width, which led to us stealing their technology, making our train tracks the same width. So the distance between two rails is the same distance that was between two Roman chariot wheels, which I've always thought was kind of cool. Alright, we are done with our hike here at the Central Mass Rail Trail in Berlin, Massachusetts, and I wanted to go over some of the treasures that we found today. First, we found a railroad still intact from the 1880s. This place must have revolutionized people's lives in this small town, giving them an access into Boston. And 150 years later, it's still being enjoyed by people, which I find to be amazing. Also, we found some cool boulders with some quartz rock outcropping had some black minerals in it, which I'm not sure what they were, some really cool mica in it, and also one that had quartz banding through some bedrock. So that was really cool. Finally, we found a really nice swamp with the first signs of spring just popping up. And I love to see that because it's a promise of what's right around the corner and the awesome things we're going to be able to go out and find. So if you enjoyed this, I hope you subscribe, and I hope to see you again on my next video. Thanks.